You're listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, where you get valuable information you just can't find anywhere else. To thrive in today's trying times, you need the Financial Survival Network, now more than ever. Go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com and get your free newsletter and gift. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.
And welcome. You are listening to Watching the Financial Survival Network. Well, do we always need to be in a panic over something? Do you take pleasure, or does it take you away from your daily drudgery to be worrying about the end of the world or pandemics or depressions or anything else? Well, George Gammon, you know him well, expert on, I would say, the contemporary scene, not just economics, not just real estate, but the state of humanity. And George, always great to talk to you. So what is going on here? Is this part of a plan that we keep on creating greater disasters so people don't think about little things like hyperinflation coming or all these other issues, food shortages, ammo shortages, all these things? Is this all part of the plan?
I don't know if anyone knows for sure, but I think what I would encourage people to do is look at the incentives. So let's just say that you're the least popular president in human history. If we look at what has worked in the past, war has worked well for unpopular presidents if they want to be reelected. You look at what's happening with inflation, the CPI now at 7.9%. Potentially headed higher, and that's as the government measures it. We all know it's a lot higher than that. Consumer price inflation is political kryptonite. So it would behoove the administration and the powers that be, the central planners, the authoritarians that want to get reelected, to have some sort of diversion. And then you think about the media. I believe that the politicians have the media in their back pocket. And then you look at the global elite, or the people that are trying to usurp power and control. These people did a good job of that during COVID, that's for sure. And so now that that's kind of fading and is on the back burner as far as what people are talking about, they need something else. And there is nothing better to prompt people to forego their freedom and liberty than a war. You can imagine what would happen if submarines showed up on the nuclear submarines showed up on the east coast of the United States. How quickly would people be willing to ban cash, or not even how quickly would they be willing to have those regulations thrust upon them, but I think they would demand it. So like the scenario that I always see playing out, especially if what happens in Russia and Ukraine continues for, let's say, the next year, is I see like this McCarthyism 2.0. And, a lot of people say, well, there was a lot of Russian or a lot of communists involved in the government and entertainment back then. Yeah, but he took a shotgun approach to it. And I don't know if that's the wise thing to do. And I see us taking the United States and the West taking a shotgun approach to condemning, all Russians as an example. But my point there is that if this continues a lot further, I'm guessing you'll see people and the politicians and the central planners say, well, this is why we need a central bank digital currency, because the Fed has to monitor every single transaction, because who knows, we could have, Russian spies among us, and they could be transferring money, or they could be supporting Putin somehow. And we've got to make sure that no Americans are able to do that. And the only way that we can ensure that 100% is with a central bank digital currency. And, usually under normal times, people would maybe push back a little. But under these types of circumstances, people say, oh, yes, absolutely. That's a great idea. Let's do that. It's the exact same thing that happened during the Patriot Act and back in the early 2000s. So, my point there is that look at the incentives. All the politicians are incentivized for the United States to, let's say, join this war or participate. The global elite are also incentivized. The media is incentivized. So I'm not saying that they're, purposely that they started the war, but I am saying that I believe they'll most likely try to take advantage of any crisis opportunity they can. And it's up to us as responsible, people that can use critical thinking to step back from the emotion and step back from the mob and the frenzy that the media is trying to whip us up into, and say, well, wait a minute here. This World War III thing might not be so smart, and maybe we should think about this twice before we run in guns a-blazing. And I'm not saying, obviously, the pushback there is people say, oh, I don't hear many people saying that we should start World War III. Right. But let's go back to the beginning of when Russia invaded. Back then, people weren't talking about canceling, Russian students from American universities. People weren't talking about canceling 16-year-olds from playing hockey in Canada. People weren't talking about canceling, opera singers in New York that just happened to be born in Russia. People weren't, restaurants weren't taking Moscow mules off the menu or renaming them or something like this.
They really doing that? Moscow, yeah. You can't get a Moscow mule. What are they going to call it? A Kiev mule now, or what?
Yeah, and then also too, there's this. People are pouring out all the bottles of Smirnoff vodka, and they don't even realize that's owned by a UK company. That's not even owned by a Russian company. And so this is the degree of insanity that we didn't see at the beginning, and we are starting to see more and more of. And this is why, I'm not saying that people are talking about World War III now. I'm saying let's see what happens in 3 months or 6 months. And I'm just concerned that we're on a very slippery slope right now where people are so overly emotional, and they've just completely abandoned critical thinking to the point where in 3 or 6 months, they're going to actually support the United States moving into a war with a country that's got 6,000 nuclear warheads.
Yeah. Well, it just all reminds me a lot, George, of 1984. At one point, the country, and I don't remember there were three major powers, Power 1, 2, and 3. I don't remember their names. And they're always fighting with each other. And at one time, Power 1 is fighting Power 3. And then all of a sudden, like presto, there's no mention of fighting Power 3. They're fighting Power 2. I think it was Oceania was one. I can't remember the names. It was a long time ago that I read this book. But they remove all reference to the fact that like 5 minutes ago, they were in a pitched battle with Power 3. And nobody even blinks an eye. It just is a means of control, I think, like you're saying. It really is.
Yeah. Another thing that has my spidey senses tingling, with this whole Russia-Ukraine deal is, number one, going back to what we were saying earlier, it gives Biden or the administration a great out for everything. Because, you got a problem with inflation. Oh, it's not me. I didn't do it. The central bank didn't. It's Putin's fault.
Putin's fault.
Everything. He's even talking about, he references gas prices. He says Putin's gas price hikes or something like that. He has to add in Putin to everything that's happening that's bad in the economy. Yeah. I mean, it's unbelievable that people fall for this. But what I was saying is, one of the first things that made me suspicious about what's happening with Ukraine and Russia. And let me be very clear. I'm not trying to justify what Russia did. I'm a extreme libertarian. I don't condone any country invading any other country, including the United States invading Iraq. Mm-hmm. So I don't condone any of that. So I'm not saying that Russia is in the right or Putin is in the right. But, right from the get-go, it seemed to me like the media was really trying to sensationalize and really not, objective isn't even the right word. They were trying to somehow manipulate. The way they were reporting it seemed to me it was done in a way to get people overly emotional. And one of the first things that led me to believe this is the fact that they try to position this whole thing as good versus evil. Like it's that simple. Like there's no nuance here whatsoever. Just let's forget about the 1990s. Let's forget about NATO. Let's forget about everything. And it's just simply, let's just turn it into a James Bond movie. Let's just turn it into like a Mission Impossible, or like a Jason Bourne. And if you think about when you go to watch a movie like that, right at the very beginning, the writers, they have to do character development, right? So they have to show the first scene with the bad guy is always the bad guy doing something horrific that makes you hate that person right off the bat. Yep. And so then at the end of the movie, when the good guy beats the bad guy and kills him or whatever, you're cheering for the good guy. Where if they didn't do that character development, if they didn't set it up as just good versus evil, if there was nuance there, then you might feel bad for the bad guy and you wouldn't be cheering so much for the good guy, and you wouldn't leave the movie satisfied, right? Because what they're trying to do there in that movie is they're trying to take you through an emotional journey, and they're trying to get you emotionally engaged to a storyline. That's the point. But look at what the media is doing with this whole Ukraine-Russia deal, and it's the exact same thing. Yep. They're just trying to use character development, to set Zelensky up as the hero, as the good guy. He's Jason Bourne, and Putin is the James Bond villain. And listen, I'm not saying that Putin is a great guy, but I am saying that Zelensky might not be. He might not be a hero. He's a hero in what he's doing. But let's go back 2 or 3 years, and the media was crucifying him. If you go back and look at the media articles from, like I said, 2 or 3 years ago, they're saying how he is an authoritarian, how, Ukraine is incredibly dangerous, that he's in bed with the alt-right and all of these things, all these disparaging things. And then now all of a sudden, he's Jason Bourne, and I'm like, okay, well, why is the media doing a 180 here? And I'm not saying he's not a hero, but it's weird that the media has done this complete, change their tune completely. While at the same time, they're just trying to set this up as good versus evil and not getting into any nuance whatsoever, just like a movie would try to draw you in and get you emotionally engaged by oversimplifying things. And I just see that playing out. And I think people need to be very leery of that.
Yeah, very leery. Putin, I think, is a stone cold killer. Hey, he's KGB. That kind of says it all. As KGB, CIA, same thing. And they're all pursuing their own interests, and they don't really care about the country involved and the fact that the guy has accumulated huge wealth, if we are to believe the media stories about it, which I think there is some truth to them. But one thing I wanted to talk about, they say that truth is the first casualty of war.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I would also add that it's the first casualty of government. When you're at a war, in a war with no end in sight, there's no truth.
Don't just survive, thrive. The Financial Survival Network.
Torque Resources is an exploration company establishing a portfolio of premier copper gold early stage projects in Chile. Torque's management and technical teams have a strong track record of raising capital, discovery, and monetization of exploration successes. The company's Margarita Copper Gold project is located within the prolific coastal Cordillera Belt in Chile, which hosts some of the world's largest and most profitable copper mines. The Margarita project possesses excellent discovery potential for a major copper discovery due to the strength of the alteration system, large-scale magnetic targets, and the presence of copper oxide mineralization. Drilling is anticipated to begin in Q3 of this year. Torque trades in Canada under TORQ and on the OTC under TRBMF. To learn more, go to torqueresources.com. That's torqueresources.com.
This is the Financial Survival Network, the information you need to thrive now more than ever.
Yeah. I talked to Jim Rogers about this the other day, and I asked him specifically, I said, how do you find the truth? Because we all know Jim Rogers, and he's notorious for going in and investing in areas that, there are quote unquote uninvestable and may have a lot of media propaganda around them. And he said that the trick he uses is he goes to multiple media sources in different countries as well. So just using Ukraine and Russia, what he would do is he would go to the Western media, knowing that it's propaganda. And he'd also go to the Russian media, knowing darn well it's propaganda. But then he'd go to, the BBC, or he'd go to Al Jazeera or something other, like 4 or 5 total media sources from different countries, and try to just sift through all the BS and all the noise to get down to the truth. And he said that's what has served him well in the past. And I think that we definitely need to take that approach today.
And so one of my functions here, Financial Survival Network, is to deconstruct the news. And what we used to do in the beginning was just, if there's a term in there like Russian aggression or something like that, do a time search and search that and see how many times it pops up, because the media is all complicit. They're either creating things together or picking up after one creative. If the Times says it, then the Post gets it, and then every media outlet picks it up. And what I would do is isolate it down to when that meme or when that concept first came down, to see who did it, and then to see who picked up on it. And that gives you a lot of insight, because you need to deconstruct it. That's one of the things, is being a lawyer. Somebody I was talking the other day said, how do you find the truth? Same question you asked Jimmy Rogers, who I know quite well, great guy, and just an all-around decent person. And that is really crucial, is deconstructing it. One way you deconstruct is you follow the money. Another way you deconstruct is who benefits. There's a Latin term.
The incentives, right?
Yeah,
right.
Who's got the incentive here? Because it's so important in this day of having information overload that you just not follow blindly. I call some of these people from way back when, dealing with the pandemic branch. Well, I don't want to say it because we'll probably get censored, but based on a cult that took place in Texas.
It was Waco, Texas, wasn't it?
Yeah, Waco, where the branch Davidians. What rhymes with Davidians, right? That's what I call these people, because they've totally drunk the Kool-Aid, and you can't reason with them. One thing I've learned, though, I've learned a way to counteract and how to break any person's thoughts who are not using critical analysis, who are not free thinking. I figured out how to do it, and I don't want to say it on air here, but it is virtually 100% effective. It's not going to convert them to believers, or they are believers already, but it's going to put a chink in the armor and force them into cognitive dissonance, which can be the first step towards critical thinking, when all of a sudden you realize something that you believe isn't necessarily true. What did Mark Twain said? It's not the things you believe that get you into trouble. It's the things you absolutely believe that are wrong that get you into trouble, right? And that's where humanity's at now. They don't know. You don't know who to believe. You don't know what to believe. You don't know any of these things, George. And unless you've got the tools, which I feel as an attorney, I actually got the tools to learn how to dissect arguments, break them down, play the other side of the argument, the side that you don't agree with. What is a great debate team in a college or whatever? What makes them great is they can take the opposite side of the argument, either side of the argument, and argue it, debate it, and win, right?
Yeah.
So what you need to do, I'll just give you a hint, is if you're with somebody and you totally disagree, take their side of the argument and argue it in such a way that they know that what they believe is absurd.
Yeah. And I think that's a great strategy, by the way. And one thing that I do on social media, or I try to get my viewers and listeners to do, is just to your earlier point, you should be able to argue the other side better than you can argue your side. And if you can't, then you need to look yourself in the mirror and say, well, maybe I'm not really using critical thinking. Maybe I'm using more emotion. But going back to the incentives, that's one thing that I'd leave your audience with is if you could just take one thing away from this conversation, just think about who benefits from war. Just think about that. Who benefits if the United States goes to war with Russia? Because there's definitely people that benefit, that's for sure. And so, you have to look at the unpopular politicians. They would definitely benefit the global elite, the media, the people we talked about earlier. So then the question becomes, are they morally sound enough to not act on those incentives? So let's say the administration was incentivized to go to war, and all they had to do is manipulate or get the media to manipulate the population to support that war. Well, you would have to, knowing that they're incentivized to do that, you would have to come to the conclusion that morally they're so upright that they just wouldn't go there, right? Yeah. Like the administration knows that they can benefit for going to war, but you know what? That's just crossing an ethical line in the sand that we're not willing to cross.
Hey.
Right. Well, so then think that one through. Do you really think there's a politician? Do you really think the media, the World Economic Forum, the IMF, has that moral and ethical line in the sand that they're just not willing to cross to usurp power and control and get reelected? Personally, I think the probability of that is incredibly low, but I'd leave that, a question for your audience to answer for themselves.
Hey, it's so true. Go back to Smedley Butler. All right, 1933, delivered a speech. War is just a racket. And I'm going to read a couple of lines from it. I don't want to go through the whole thing. It's not very long. You can find his book. But war is just a racket. A racket is best described, I believe, as something that is not what it seems to the majority of people. Only a small inside group knows what it is about. It's conducted for the benefit of the very few at the expense of the masses. And, he goes on, but he said, for 33 years, I helped make Mexico, especially Tampico, safe for American oil interests in 1914. I helped make Haiti and Cuba a decent place for the National Citibank boys to collect revenues in. I helped in the raping of half a dozen Central American republics for the benefit of Wall Street. The record of racketeering is long. I helped purify Nicaragua for the international banking house of Brown Brothers, which still happens to be around in Lower Manhattan, where have I heard that name before? And that was, I think, Harriman, Averell Harriman. So we're talking about globalists. I brought light to the Dominican Republic for American sugar interest in 1916. In China, I helped to see to it that Standard Oil went on its way unmolested. During those years, I had, as the boys in the back room would say, a swell racket. Looking back on it, I feel that I could have given Al Capone a few hints. The best he could do was to operate his racket in 3 districts. I operated on 3 continents. I mean, that is probably the most
powerful,
explanatory, powerful speech. I highly, highly recommend all of you out there to look up Smedley Butler. All of his books are in public domain. You can get them on Audible. But this is a guy, he said, I was just muscle. I was just, basically like he's like an enforcer brought in by the mob to collect debts that are due. And, this is one of the most decorated soldiers in U.S. history. And he goes on to say that with war, basically the profits are measured in dollars and the losses are measured in human lives. And that sums it all up. And that, that's why you have to deconstruct and not buy into it, because the media is just there as a cheerleader, as to support the existing structure. I hate to sound like a crazy liberal here, but this is the purpose of it. And actually, one thing we've learned here is the so-called liberals are, unlike before, supporting war here, George. They're in
it's unbelievable, isn't it, Kerry? It's just shocking. And another thing that really surprises me is people, let's just say, liberals or whomever, people that were highly skeptical of the media during COVID for all the right reasons, are now all of a sudden buying every single thing they say about Russia and Ukraine, hook, line, and sinker. Yeah, it's like, wait a minute here. Don't you realize that these are the exact same people that have been lying to you for the last 2 years? So why all of a sudden do you think they're not lying to you now? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Hey, do you remember that commercial from way back when, Joe Isuzu? And he says basically, I'm lying, and he's talking about all this stuff, and then there's a closed caption going on. I'm lying. I'm not telling the truth. And then there was a guy who wrote a book about manipulating the internet called "Trust Me, I'm Lying," and he was basically a PR damage control guy. And he'd create controversies out of nothing just to drive clicks, just to drive eyeballs to a website, So it's like Putin, you want to get all the animal rights people there. Putin kicks dogs,
Yeah.
And or you don't even say that. You have a headline: Is Vladimir Putin a dog abuser, an animal abuser? ? And the answer is always no. When you see that question mark in a headline, the answer is no. But they place the thought in your head. And that's what I'm saying. Like, the way you get back, the way you learn persuasion is agree with your adversary, almost over the top agree with them, and then, point out the errors of their way. Well, yeah. We got to get going now. But hey, as far as protecting yourself against inflation, my personal view is rather than dreading inflation, you should be welcoming inflation into your life, because it is your greatest opportunity to really acquire wealth and to get ahead, because the vast majority of the population doesn't understand it and don't know how to cash in on it.
Yeah, going back to Jim Rogers, I just re-listened to his book Hot Commodities from 2004, and it just reminds me of the commodity super cycles. And I think that we are in 2020 March. I think we bottomed out, and that when we look back in 20 or 30 years, that will be the start of this next commodity super cycle. They never go up in a straight line, never, ever, ever. But they usually last about 10 or 15 years. So for your audience who's extremely concerned about wealth preservation in a time of high consumer price inflation, commodities are usually a good place to be. And it worked very well. That the last commodity super cycle started in 1996. It ended in 2011. And I think that we're in one now that will be sustained until, say, 2030, 2035. Again, nothing goes up in a straight line, probably overbought right now. But that's what I'm looking at to preserve my purchasing power in an era of high inflation.
All right. Well, George, can't thank you enough for coming on. Hey, just tell us, where do we find you? I know your YouTube channel is blasted off. Where else do we find you these days?
Oh, you can find the Rebel Capitalist Show podcast on iTunes. I've got 2 channels now, actually, the George Gammon channel, the Rebel Capitalist channel. You can find me on Twitter at George Gammon.
All right, excellent. And there's a link to it in the show notes to this interview on financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Make sure you sign up for your free newsletter. If you have a question for George, you can always shoot me an email, kl@kerrylutz.com. We'll get you an answer. George, we'll talk to you again real soon. Be well, my friend.
You too, Kerry. Thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening to Kerry Lutz's Financial Survival Network, your solution to today's trying times. For the latest, go to financialsurvivalnetwork.com. Financial Survival Network, now more than ever.